Imagine spending years working right beside someone you care about deeply, while pretending it means nothing. Smiling through meetings. Staying late at the office. Keeping your feelings locked away behind polite words and perfect timing. Emma Collins lived like that every day at Luminate Corporation. She watched the company's powerful CEO, Victoria Hale, from a careful distance. Admired her. Respected her. Loved her in silence. But when emotions grow too heavy to hide, and one unexpected moment outside the office shifts everything, silence stops being an option. Before we step into this story, remember to subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The elevator doors had already closed for the final time. Emma's resignation letter now rested on Victoria's desk, quiet but unstoppable. Morning light poured through the tall glass windows on the 42nd floor, stretching across the sleek marble of the executive suite. Emma stood outside Victoria Hale's office, the envelope shaking slightly in her carefully groomed hands. 3 years. 3 years of early mornings and late nights. 3 years of knowing what Victoria needed before she ever asked. 3 years of quick glances across meeting tables, brief touches when passing files, and pretending her heart stayed calm whenever Victoria spoke her name in that steady, confident voice. Emma knocked twice on the wooden door. The sound echoed down the empty hallway. "Come in." Victoria's voice came without her looking up from her screen. She never did during their morning briefings. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, her appearance flawless as always, as if she hadn't already been working since sunrise. The tailored blazer, the composed posture, the quiet authority. This was the woman who had grown Luminate Corp from a small idea into a global force. Emma knew every detail of Victoria's habits by heart. The way she held her coffee when thinking. The slight pause before making a tough call. The look in her eyes when inspiration struck. "Your schedule for today," Emma said, setting the tablet down with practiced ease. Her voice sounded steady, calm, professional. "The board meeting at 10. Lunch with investors early afternoon. The quarterly review later in the day." She'd even rearranged calls to give Victoria more time to prepare. Victoria's hands stopped moving. Something felt different. After all this time, she could sense it. She looked up, and their eyes met briefly before Emma looked away. Even that moment sent a rush through Emma's chest. Her throat tightened. She had practiced this moment over and over in the quiet of her apartment, long after midnight, repeating the words until they felt manageable. Slowly, she placed the envelope beside the tablet. It looked small. Too small for something that carried so much weight. Victoria stared at it, her expression unreadable. Calm. Guarded. The same face she wore in difficult negotiations and high-stakes decisions. "What is this?" she asked. "My resignation." The words hung between them, heavy and final. Victoria's hand froze midair. The room fell silent except for distant city noise and the soft hum around them. "Resignation," Victoria repeated quietly. "When does this take effect?" "Immediately." Emma had planned to keep it clean and simple. A thank you. A handshake. A graceful exit. She hadn't expected the tension in Victoria's jaw or the searching look in her eyes. "May I ask why?" Victoria said. Emma's heart raced. The real answer pressed against her chest, desperate to be spoken. But instead, she said, "Personal reasons." Victoria let out a short laugh, sharp and empty. "Personal reasons. After everything you've given this place." Emma met her gaze, steady despite the ache. "That's all I can give you." Victoria stood and walked toward the window, hands behind her back, staring out over the harbor. Emma watched her, memorizing every detail, aware this might be the last time. "I could ask you to stay," Victoria said softly. "You could try," Emma replied. Victoria turned, and for a brief second, something real broke through her composure. Confusion. Hurt. Something unspoken. Then it vanished. "Emma," Victoria said, her voice quieter now, almost unguarded. Victoria stepped closer, and Emma caught the familiar scent of her perfume. Soft jasmine mixed with warm cedar. A scent Emma had come to associate with long nights, quiet focus, and feelings she never allowed herself to name out loud. If this is about the Morrison account, Victoria said gently, the hours, the pressure, we can fix that. Emma shook her head. It's not about work. Victoria paused. Then what is it? Emma closed her eyes, searching for courage she didn't feel she had. When she opened them, Victoria was closer than before. Close enough for Emma to see the faint gold flecks in her green eyes. Close enough to notice the small freckles across her nose that makeup never fully hid. I can't tell you, Emma said softly. Can't, Victoria asked, or won't? Both. Victoria studied her in silence. Emma felt stripped bare, as if every hidden feeling was suddenly visible. Victoria had always been sharp, able to read people with ease. It was part of what made her successful. But Emma had spent 3 years perfecting distance. Being capable. Reliable. Invisible. Finally, Victoria straightened. Her tone cooled. Controlled. Very well. HR will handle the paperwork. You can clear your desk today. Emma nodded. She had expected this. The emotional wall. The familiar distance. It still hurt more than she'd prepared for. Thank you for the opportunity, Miss Hale. The formality felt heavy. Miss Hale, not Victoria. Not the name she used during late nights when the office was quiet and everything felt closer. The words sounded final. Emma. Victoria's voice stopped her at the door. Emma's hand rested on the handle, trembling. Whatever this is, Victoria said, more softly, I hope you find what you're looking for. Emma swallowed. She wanted to turn back. To say everything. To choose honesty just once. Instead, she whispered, I hope so too, and walked out without looking back. Past the desk that had been hers for 3 years. Past the conference room where admiration had slowly turned into something deeper. Past the break room where Victoria had once laughed at her bad coffee joke, and Emma had felt lighter for days after. The elevator ride down felt endless. Each floor another piece of her life slipping away. The job. The routine. The woman she loved. Her phone buzzed. A message from her best friend, Sarah. How did it go? Are you okay? Emma stared at the screen. How do you explain leaving the best job of your life because your heart couldn't take it anymore? How do you explain that staying would have broken you, but leaving hurt all at once? She typed, it's done. The typing bubbles appeared, vanished, then returned. Come over, Sarah wrote. I have wine, ice cream, and terrible movies. Emma almost smiled. Sarah always knew. The elevator opened into the bright lobby. Glass, steel, ambition everywhere. Emma had walked through this space every morning for years. Today it felt unfamiliar, like she no longer belonged. The guards nodded as she passed. Outside, the cool autumn air brushed her face. October was usually her favorite. The colors. The light. The promise of change. Today it felt cruel. The city moved on around her. Meetings. Tourists. Students rushing to class. Life continuing without pause. Her phone buzzed again. An email from HR confirming her resignation. Already processed. Victoria was always efficient. Emma took a cab to Sarah's place. As the city passed by, she let herself think of Victoria one last time. The focused expression. The rolled sleeves during crises. The way she had said Emma's name that morning. Soft. Confused. Almost caring. Emma pressed her forehead to the window and finally let the tears come. Back on the 42nd floor, Victoria stood by the window, staring down at the streets below. She couldn't see Emma, but she imagined her out there somewhere, walking away. Victoria opened the resignation letter, her hand steady despite the strange ache in her chest. The words were polite. Distant. 4 sentences. 3 years reduced to ink on paper. No explanation. No warmth. No trace of what had passed between them during all those late nights spent building something together. Victoria crushed the letter in her hand, then slowly flattened it again. She read it once more. Then again. She searched the words for something hidden. A hint. A reason. Anything that could explain how the person she relied on most, the person she trusted more than anyone else, had disappeared with nothing but personal reasons. Victoria had built her entire career on understanding people. She could read a room in minutes. She knew who was pretending, who was sincere, and who had an agenda. But Emma had never fit into that world. She wasn't calculating or guarded. She was steady. Honest. Real. And maybe that was why losing her felt deeper than Victoria expected. Like something important had been taken before she even realized she needed it. The intercom buzzed, sharp and sudden. Miss Hale, the board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Victoria adjusted her blazer, glanced at her reflection in the glass, and slipped back into her role. The CEO. The composed leader. Still, as she walked toward the conference room, a quiet sense of unease followed her. Something had shifted. Something she couldn't control. And that unsettled her more than any market risk ever had. The meeting passed in a haze of numbers and forecasts. Victoria spoke with confidence, asked the right questions, made firm decisions. But her thoughts kept drifting. To the empty desk outside her office. To the look on Emma's face that morning. Calm, resolved, and quietly devastated. Victoria? Richard Chen's voice pulled her back. Your view on the European rollout? She answered smoothly, but it felt automatic, like muscle memory. The discussion moved on, yet she felt detached, like she was watching herself perform a role she'd played too many times before. When the board finally left, Victoria returned to her office and stared at the letter again. She reached for her phone and found Emma's contact. She had never removed it. Her thumb hovered over the screen. What would she even say? She imagined the words and dismissed each version. Nothing sounded right. Eventually, she locked the phone and set it aside, but her eyes kept drifting to the space where Emma used to sit. The ache returned, familiar and uncomfortable. At lunchtime, she caught herself waiting for Emma's reminder. Instead, a temporary assistant knocked. The moment felt wrong, like the rhythm of her day had been disrupted. The investor meeting went well. A strong partnership. Exactly the kind of success that once energized her. But all she could think about was how Emma would have prepared her, how effortlessly she made everything run. The realization hit hard. Emma hadn't just supported her work. She had improved it. Improved her. Victoria excused herself early and returned to her office, trying to picture the coming days without Emma. The mornings. The schedules. The quiet understanding between them. She had built her life around independence. Around not needing anyone. Somewhere along the way, that had changed. And she hadn't noticed until now. Her phone rang. A reporter asking about balance. Victoria almost laughed. Balance. She looked around her silent office and thought about her quiet home. I don't have it all, she said honestly before ending the call. The words stayed with her. Every choice has a cost. And suddenly, she wondered what hers had truly cost her. By evening, she gave up on work and drove home. The city passed by in lights and movement. Her apartment was just as she'd left it. Perfect. Empty. She poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. Somewhere out there, Emma was living her life. And Victoria realized how little she actually knew about it. The thought of Emma moving on stirred something sharp inside her. She told herself it was just stress. Just loss. But deep down, she knew that wasn't the truth. Something about it unsettled Victoria in a way no hostile takeover or boardroom ambush ever had. This fear was quieter, deeper. It didn't come from losing control of a company. It came from realizing she might have lost something far more personal. She finished her wine and set the glass in the sink. The penthouse felt too large, too silent. When she finally went to bed, sleep refused to come. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day over and over. Emma's steady voice. The envelope on her desk. The way the office felt emptier than it ever had before. It felt like the end of something she hadn't even known she wanted, and that made it worse. At 3 a.m, Victoria gave up. She got out of bed and walked into her home office, the city lights still glowing through the windows. She opened her laptop and told herself this was practical. Necessary. She needed to prepare for hiring a replacement. Nothing more. Emma Collins. 28. MBA from Harvard Business School. Top of her class. Prior experience at Goldman Sachs. Joined Luminate Corp 3 years earlier. Victoria scrolled through performance reviews. Outstanding. Consistent. Reliable. Every note praised Emma's judgment, work ethic, and intuition. Victoria felt a dull ache in her chest she refused to acknowledge. She clicked through company event photos. There was Emma at the holiday party 2 years ago, wearing a simple black dress, smiling softly. Victoria remembered that night too clearly. How she had lost her place mid-speech for just a second. Emma at the Martha's Vineyard retreat, laughing openly, relaxed in a way Victoria rarely saw. Emma holding an award, eyes warm, confident, looking straight into the camera like she wasn't afraid of being seen. Victoria closed the laptop and poured herself a glass of scotch. She rarely drank alone. Tonight felt like an exception to many rules she'd lived by for years. Her thoughts drifted to the countless late nights they'd spent working side by side. Emma appearing with coffee at exactly the right moment. Catching Victoria's eye during dull meetings and making a face that nearly broke her composure. Staying late, long after she should have gone home, simply because she knew how much the work mattered. Victoria wondered, not for the first time, if she had missed something obvious. Or ignored it on purpose. She had been so focused on rules and boundaries and the responsibilities of leadership. CEO and assistant. Power and professionalism. There had always been good reasons. Ethical ones. Sensible ones. And yet, those reasons had cost her the best assistant she'd ever had. Possibly the best person she'd ever known. She returned to bed just as the sky began to lighten. When sleep finally came, it was restless. She dreamed of brown eyes and half-smiles. Of words left unsaid. Of a resignation letter turning to ash before she could read it. When she woke a few hours later, the first thought in her mind was Emma. And Victoria knew, with a sinking certainty, that this loss wasn't something she could simply work through. 6 months passed. Life at Luminate Corp continued. Deals closed. Profits rose. Victoria performed her role flawlessly. But something essential was missing. Her new assistant was efficient but distant. The days felt longer. The victories felt smaller. One Thursday evening, Victoria stood in the produce section of Whole Foods in Back Bay, holding a basket she barely remembered picking up. She couldn't remember the last time she'd done her own grocery shopping. That was what assistants were for. She pushed the thought aside and reached for a bag of spinach without really seeing it. The store was busy. Young professionals gathering dinner after long days. Families debating ingredients. Students arguing over brands. Victoria moved through it all with quiet focus, already thinking about contracts waiting at home. Then she heard it. Laughter. Bright. Genuine. Familiar. Her hand froze midair. Victoria knew that laugh. She had heard it echo through conference rooms and quiet hallways. She turned slowly, her heart suddenly racing. 3 aisles away, near the bakery, stood Emma Collins. Emma looked different. Softer. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders. She wore jeans and a green sweater that made her eyes glow. She looked relaxed. Happy. And she was standing beside a tall man who leaned in close, clearly comfortable in her space. Victoria felt something twist sharply in her chest. She studied the man without meaning to. He looked kind. Easy. The type of person who belonged in grocery stores on weeknights. The type of life Victoria had never allowed herself. Emma laughed again, and then she turned. Their eyes met across the crowded store. Time seemed to stop. Emma's smile faded. Surprise crossed her face, followed by something deeper. Uncertainty. Emotion. The man noticed and glanced toward Victoria, curious but unconcerned. He said something quietly. Emma shook her head, still looking at Victoria. For 6 months, Victoria had imagined this moment without meaning to. What she would say. What Emma might look like. None of those thoughts prepared her for the reality of seeing her again. Emma spoke softly to the man, who nodded and pushed the cart toward the checkout. Emma hesitated, fingers brushing her throat, then took a breath and walked toward Victoria. They stopped a few feet apart. Victoria, Emma said. Emma, Victoria replied. Neither moved. The store noise faded into the background. I didn't expect to see you, Emma said gently. Neither did I, Victoria admitted. There was an awkward pause. You look well, Victoria added. So do you. Another pause. Then Emma smiled, smaller than before. How have you been? Busy, Victoria said. Then, more honestly, not the same. Emma nodded. Me neither. They stood there, 2 women surrounded by ordinary life, holding months of unspoken words between them. I'm glad you're doing okay, Victoria said. I am, Emma replied. I needed space. Time. Victoria swallowed. I understand. Or at least, I'm trying to. Emma hesitated. Would you like to talk sometime? Properly? Victoria didn't hesitate. Yes. They exchanged numbers, though neither had deleted the others. The gesture mattered anyway. Emma smiled again, warmer this time. Take care, Victoria. You too, Emma. They walked away in opposite directions. Victoria finished her shopping in a daze. Back home, the penthouse felt different. Not emptier. Just quieter. Waiting. Later that night, Victoria sat on her balcony, city lights below. She thought about fear. Real fear. Not of failure or loss of control, but of opening herself to something she couldn't manage or predict. Something human. For the first time in a long while, that fear didn't feel like something to avoid. It felt like something worth facing. Victoria's heart raced so fast she could barely hear anything else. She set down her shopping basket, trying to look calm while everything inside her spun. Victoria. Emma's voice was softer than she remembered, but still warm, the same voice that had been her guide through late-night deadlines and impossible problems. You look good. Thank you. You too. Victoria felt her throat tighten, like she was trying to swallow a lump. You seem happy. Emma's cheeks tinged with pink. Mostly, she admitted. They stood there in the middle of the store, surrounded by fresh produce and the hum of other shoppers, yet Victoria felt like it was just the 2 of them. The last 6 months vanished, and suddenly they were back in her office, working late, side by side, with unspoken words hanging in the air. How have you been? Emma asked, and Victoria almost laughed at the absurdity. Small talk, after everything? After years of long hours, shared struggles, and quiet understanding, acting casual felt impossible. The Singapore expansion went through. We acquired 2 startups in the first quarter, and the Yamamoto deal closes tomorrow. Victoria caught herself slipping into business mode, the safe world of facts and numbers. That's great. I saw it in TechCrunch. That Singapore deal was always your dream. Emma's cheeks grew warmer. Old habits. I lived and breathed Luminate for 3 years. It's hard to stop caring. Victoria had 1,000 questions she wanted to ask. Where were you working now? Are you happy? Do you ever think of me? Do you regret leaving? Who was that man? But all that came out was, why did you leave? The question hung there, electric, carrying 6 months of confusion and unspoken feelings. Emma blinked, swallowed hard. Victoria pressed on before she could stop herself. 6 months. I've been wondering what I did wrong. What I could have done differently. You were the best assistant I ever had. You were. She stopped, almost afraid to say more, afraid to admit that Emma had been more than just a coworker. She'd been the reason her life ran smoothly, the one who made chaos manageable. I was what? Victoria glanced around the store, suddenly aware of how public it all was. Shoppers had started to glance their way, some recognizing her from interviews or magazines. The last thing she needed was a headline about the CEO breaking down over vegetables. Can we go somewhere else? She asked, hating how much she sounded like she needed this. Emma looked toward the checkout, where a man waited. Victoria followed her eyes and felt that familiar tightness return. I can't. David. Victoria repeated the name, tasting its bitterness. She held her breath, waiting. Friend. We're having dinner. Friend. Relief spread through Victoria's chest in an instant. Not boyfriend, not partner. Just a friend. Please, Victoria said, her voice revealing more than she intended. 5 minutes? Coffee next door? Emma hesitated, torn, glancing at David and then back at Victoria. Victoria watched her inner struggle, duty and politeness wrestling with curiosity and something else. Emma. Victoria stepped closer, close enough to smell the familiar floral scent she had always associated with safety and calm. I need to know why you left. I need to understand. Emma's eyes searched her face, and Victoria felt exposed, like Emma could see every sleepless night and every unanswered question. Her carefully structured life had felt slightly off since Emma walked out. Finally, Emma whispered, okay. Victoria felt a wave of relief so strong it made her dizzy. Emma went back to David, and Victoria watched them quietly, not analyzing every glance or gesture. David nodded, gave her a friendly peck on the cheek, and left with their groceries. When Emma returned, her expression was careful but not cold. There's a Starbucks around the corner. They walked in silence. The October air was crisp, the streets of Boston painted in red and gold. Sunlight touched everything with a golden glow, but Victoria barely noticed. She was focused entirely on Emma. The coffee shop was full but not crowded, a mix of students, couples, and business people. Victoria ordered black coffee, no cream, something she hadn't touched in months. Emma got a chai latte with extra foam, the same she had every day at 3 p.m. for 3 years at Luminate. Some things stayed exactly the same. They chose a small table tucked into the corner, away from the busiest part of the cafe. Victoria sat across from Emma and suddenly realized she had no idea where to begin. How do you ask someone why they disappeared from your life without warning? How do you admit that their absence left a quiet emptiness you couldn't explain away with work? You look good, Emma said softly, breaking the silence. Rested? Victoria almost laughed. That couldn't have been further from the truth. She had been working longer hours than ever, burying herself in deals and plans with a kind of restless energy her board had started to notice. Sleep came in fragments, filled with half-finished conversations and familiar eyes she couldn't forget. I'd been busy, Victoria said instead. Same as always. The new assistant is capable. Emma smiled, just a little, and Victoria felt it hit her harder than it should have. High praise coming from you. She's not you, Victoria said before she could stop herself. The honesty in her own voice surprised her. Emma's smile faded, and she looked down at her latte, slowly stirring it even though it didn't need stirring. Victoria, Emma said carefully, I need to understand. What did I do wrong? Was I too much? Too demanding? Did I make things harder for you? Victoria leaned forward, the words rushing out. If I ever made you uncomfortable, if I crossed a line without realizing. No, Emma said firmly, cutting her off. You didn't. You never did. She looked up then, steady and sure. You were a good boss. More than good. You challenged me. You trusted me. You made me better. Then why? Victoria asked quietly. Emma went still for a long moment, her spoon moving in slow, careful circles. Victoria watched her hands, hands she knew so well. Hands that had kept her world running smoothly for years. Some things are hard to explain, Emma said at last. Try me, Victoria replied gently. I deal with hard things for a living. Emma met her eyes, and whatever Victoria saw there made her breath catch. You really want to know? Yes. Emma took a deep breath, and the air between them felt suddenly heavy, like everything depended on what came next. Because I'm in love with you. The words landed hard. Victoria felt like the ground shifted beneath her, like something inside her cracked open. The cafe noise continued around them, cups clinking, voices rising and falling, but it all felt distant. What? Victoria managed. I'm in love with you, Emma repeated, steadier now. I have been for a long time. I don't know exactly when it started, but I knew for sure during the Singapore crisis. You were pushing yourself so hard, and I stayed late every night because I couldn't stand the idea of you facing it alone. That's when I realized it wasn't just respect or loyalty. It was love. Victoria couldn't speak. Her mind raced, replaying the past through a new lens. The long nights. The quiet looks. The moments that had felt charged without explanation. You're in love with me, Victoria said slowly. Yes. And that's why you left. Yes. Emma's voice dropped. I couldn't keep pretending it was just work. Every day hurt. Every smile from you meant more than it should. Every time you dated someone else, it felt like losing something I never had the right to want. Victoria felt warmth rise in her face. She remembered those relationships. How none of them ever felt right. How something always seemed missing. I knew it was impossible, Emma continued. You're Victoria Hale. You're powerful and accomplished, and I was just your assistant. The one who managed your calendar and tried not to stare at you during meetings. You were never just that, Victoria said immediately, the words charged with more emotion than she expected. Emma looked startled. Then what was I? Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. The truth pressed against her chest, unfamiliar and frightening. How deeply she had relied on Emma. How much quieter everything felt without her. How often she had caught herself watching Emma instead of the screen in front of her. I don't know, Victoria admitted. They sat there in silence, the weight of everything finally out in the open. So now you know, Emma said softly. That's why I left. Loving you and pretending I didn't was tearing me apart. I thought distance might fix it. And did it? Victoria asked. Emma let out a quiet, humorless laugh. What do you think? Victoria looked at Emma and truly saw her for the first time. Not the composed professional she remembered, but the strain beneath the surface. The way Emma's hands shook slightly around her cup. The way her gaze kept drifting away, like holding eye contact hurt too much. She seemed smaller somehow, like carrying that secret for so long had slowly worn her down. Emma, But Emma was already standing, her latte barely touched. I should go. David's waiting. And this was a mistake. Emma, wait. No, Victoria. Emma's voice wavered despite her effort to stay calm. I shouldn't have told you. I just needed you to understand why I left. I didn't want you thinking you did something wrong. You didn't. This was my issue. My feelings. My failure to keep things professional. It's not a failure, Victoria said, standing as well. It's not a problem. But Emma was already moving away, weaving through the tables toward the door. Victoria stayed frozen, watching her disappear into the crowd. The reality hit all at once. Emma Collins had been in love with her. Had walked away from her job, her stability, because staying hurt too much. Victoria sat back down slowly, staring at the abandoned cup in front of her. The foam had settled. The drink was still warm. She touched it absently, like it might anchor her. Her phone buzzed. Her driver was ready. She stared at the message. She was supposed to go home. Review contracts. Prepare for another major closing. Pretend her life hadn't just shifted off its axis. She typed back, asking for a few more minutes. Those minutes stretched into an hour. Victoria sat there long after the cafe crowd thinned, replaying Emma's words again and again. The confession didn't feel shocking anymore. It felt like an answer to a question she hadn't known how to ask. When she finally left, she walked slowly to her car, the sentence echoing in her mind. Because I'm in love with you. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself to wonder what might have happened if she'd been brave enough to speak first. Sleep never came that night. Victoria lay awake in her quiet penthouse, staring at the ceiling, hearing Emma's voice in her head. The way it had sounded like honesty and goodbye at the same time. At 3 a.m, she gave up and went to her office. She opened Emma's personnel file again, telling herself she was looking at it objectively. But tonight, she was searching for signs she'd ignored. The achievements. The flawless reviews. The photos from events. Emma at the holiday party, smiling in that black dress. Emma at the retreat, laughing but glancing in Victoria's direction. Emma accepting her award, eyes warm, voice steady, yet just a little unguarded. Victoria remembered that night clearly. Remembered how Emma's voice had caught when she said her name. She poured herself a drink and sat back, thinking of the long nights they'd worked alone together. The coffee appearing exactly when she needed it. The small expressions that eased tension during endless meetings. The quiet support during crises. One memory stood out. A late night on the Morrison account. Victoria had been exhausted, ready to walk away. Emma had come around her desk, placed a brief hand on her shoulder, and reminded her who she was. You don't quit, Emma had said. You find a way. Victoria remembered how that touch had felt. How that look had stayed with her. How they had, in fact, found a way. Sitting alone now, Victoria finally understood. That moment hadn't just been motivation. It had been something deeper. Something she'd been too focused, too cautious, too afraid to recognize. Victoria wondered if Emma had felt that way even back then. If the signs had always been there and she had chosen not to see them. Or maybe she had seen them and pushed the thought away because it felt dangerous. She finished her drink and tried to picture a different moment in time. One where Emma had walked into her office a year and a half ago and said the truth out loud. Not encouragement. Not loyalty. Just the truth. Victoria knew what she would have done. She would have shut it down. Ended it cleanly. Told herself it was about rules and boundaries and professionalism. Leaders didn't cross lines. There were reasons for that. Good ones. Still, sitting alone in her penthouse, surrounded by proof of everything she had achieved, she couldn't stop asking herself a harder question. Had doing the right thing slowly left her with nothing but silence? Her phone lit up with a message from Catherine. Drinks tonight? You've disappeared lately and I'm starting to think you've been kidnapped or turned into one of those executives who only talks in boardroom language. Victoria stared at the screen. Catherine had known her longer than almost anyone. Long enough to call her out without hesitation. She typed back that she was working late. It wasn't true. She was sitting there in the middle of the night, thinking about someone who used to sit just outside her office door and wondering how her world had shrunk so much without her noticing. Another message came in right away. Lying to your friends is a clear sign something's wrong. Also, it's 3:30 in the morning. What kind of work happens at 3:30 that isn't a bad idea? Victoria sighed and pressed call. Catherine picked up immediately. She joked that Victoria sounded like a malfunctioning machine. Then her voice softened. She asked what was really going on. Victoria didn't bother pretending. She said she thought she might be unraveling. Catherine laughed and corrected her math, then cut straight to the point. What's her name? Victoria froze for a second. Catherine didn't need proof. She just knew. Victoria finally said it. Emma. Her former assistant. Catherine listened as Victoria explained why Emma had left. When the words were finally out, the silence on the line felt heavy. Then Catherine said what Victoria had been avoiding all night. That this only hurt so much because the feelings weren't one-sided. Victoria wanted to argue. Instead, she thought about quiet moments that had meant more than she'd allowed herself to admit. She thought about laughter in grocery store aisles. About mornings made easier by a familiar smile and a warm cup of coffee. About long nights that didn't feel lonely because someone was there with her, believing in her when she doubted herself. She admitted the truth in a whisper. Catherine told her gently that fear wasn't a good enough reason to stay unhappy. When the call ended, dawn was breaking over the harbor. The city moved on like nothing had changed. But for Victoria, everything had. She thought about the bravery it must have taken for Emma to speak up. To walk away knowing it might hurt less than staying silent. Victoria had always trusted her instincts in business. She had made a career out of bold decisions. This felt nothing like a deal or a strategy. It felt personal. Uncertain. Risky in a way spreadsheets couldn't measure. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of her thoughts, as the morning light filled the room and left her with one question she could no longer avoid. Without thinking, she glanced at her phone, assuming it was another late message from work. Instead, she saw Emma's name. Victoria's breath caught. The subject line was simple. Thank you. Her hands shook as she opened it, her heart pounding as if everything depended on what came next. Emma thanked her for listening. She said she knew the truth had come out suddenly and that she didn't expect anything in return. She hoped things wouldn't feel strange if they crossed paths again. She said those years at the company had mattered to her, not just because of her feelings, but because Victoria had been a leader worth believing in. She wished Victoria happiness, with someone who could give her what she deserved. Then it was over. Signed neatly. Kind. Final. Victoria read the message again and again. Each time, it tightened something in her chest. Emma was letting her go. Making it easier. Taking responsibility that wasn't hers to carry. Even now, Emma was protecting her. Victoria tried to reply. She typed a few words, erased them, tried again, and stopped. What could she say that wouldn't sound selfish or confusing? That she was scared. That she hadn't stopped thinking about Emma since the day she left. That the truth had finally settled in, and it terrified her. She locked her phone and got ready for work. The day couldn't wait, even if her thoughts did. Traffic crawled through the city, but her mind stayed on that email. On the calm grace behind every sentence. On the way Emma still showed care when Victoria hadn't known how to respond at all. Meetings blurred together. Numbers were discussed. Decisions were made. None of it stuck. Her thoughts kept drifting back to a small coffee shop and a moment she couldn't undo. At lunch, she paused outside a grocery store they both liked. She didn't go in. She just stood there, remembering a familiar smile and a version of happiness she had never given herself permission to want. A call pulled her back. A reporter asking about balance. About having it all. Victoria looked at the street around her, at people rushing through lives filled with connections and risks and emotions. She answered honestly. No one has everything. Every choice costs something. When the call ended, the words stayed with her. What had her careful choices taken from her? What had distance really protected? By late afternoon, she couldn't focus at all. Everything reminded her of Emma. The clarity she brought. The quiet way she made hard days easier. When evening came, Victoria drove without thinking, past familiar streets, past places tied to memories she'd tried to ignore. She parked outside the coffee shop and sat there, staring through the window, replaying the moment Emma had spoken the truth and she had done nothing. Her phone buzzed. Catherine asking if she'd figured things out yet. Victoria stared at the screen. Had she? She thought of the email. The kindness. The courage. The silence she had answered with. She typed slowly, then sent it. She admitted what she'd been afraid to say. Catherine replied right away, asking what she was waiting for. Victoria knew the answer. She'd been waiting for certainty. For control. For proof that opening her heart wouldn't change everything. But nothing ever changed without risk. She had built her career by stepping into the unknown. She had just never done it for herself. She opened her contacts and found Emma's name. This time, she didn't pause. She asked if they could talk. Said there were things she should have said sooner. She sent the message before doubt could catch up. The reply came almost immediately. A simple question. When? Tomorrow, Victoria wrote. After work. Emma agreed and sent her address. Victoria sat there, stunned, then smiled without realizing it. For the first time in months, she drove home feeling something other than weight. When she stepped into her quiet penthouse that night, it no longer felt empty. Instead, a feeling Victoria hadn't known in years settled over her. Hope. She was finally going to tell Emma how she felt. She was going to take a chance on happiness, the same way Emma had risked everything just by speaking the truth. And for the first time in a long while, Victoria Hale allowed herself to think with her heart instead of her head. She poured a glass of wine and stepped out onto her balcony, gazing at the city lights stretching across Boston. Somewhere out there, Emma was probably finishing dinner, reading, or just living life in a way Victoria had long forgotten existed, normal, peaceful, unburdened by unspoken feelings or work stress. Tomorrow, she would find out if Emma still felt the same. Tomorrow, she would see if it was possible to repair what her silence and fear had damaged. Tomorrow, she would finally be honest about the words she had kept locked inside for months. But tonight, for the first time in half a year, she drifted into sleep without struggle, dreaming of warm brown eyes and soft smiles and a life that might be hers if she dared to reach for it. The next day, Victoria couldn't focus. She sat through a board meeting on quarterly numbers, nodding when expected but unable to stop her mind from racing through all the scenarios she might face with Emma. She skimmed contracts for the Yamamoto deal, but the details blurred as her thoughts swung between excitement and fear. By mid-afternoon, she was meant to lead a session on European expansion. Instead, she found herself staring out her office window, watching the streets below, imagining what Emma might be doing right at that moment. Was she nervous? Wondering if she had made a mistake? Wondering what this meeting would mean? Ms. Hale? The Morrison files you requested, Jennifer's voice brought her back. Victoria lifted her head and for a second expected to see Emma, smiling and carrying perfectly organized folders. Instead, it was Jennifer, efficient as ever, holding a stack of documents Victoria didn't remember asking for. Just put them on my desk, she said, forcing calm over the disappointment that pinched her chest. Jennifer placed the files down and paused in the doorway. Ms. Hale, are you okay? You seem distracted lately. Victoria almost laughed. Distracted didn't even begin to cover it. Her entire world had shrunk to Emma Collins and the conversation they were about to have. I'm fine, thank you, Jennifer, she said. Alone, she opened the files, but the numbers ran together. Instead of quarterly projections, she saw herself back in Singapore, 18 months ago, when everything had felt like it could collapse at any moment. The client threatening to pull out, the board pressing for guarantees she couldn't make, the months of sleepless nights. And Emma had been there, steady, knowing what to do before Victoria even realized it herself. On the darkest night, when the deal seemed hopeless and Victoria wanted to give up, Emma had found her at 2 a.m., slumped over her laptop. "Maybe we just cut our losses," Victoria had muttered, drained and hopeless. "You don't mean that, do you?" Emma's voice had been calm, but her presence made Victoria feel alive again. The pressure had been immense, impossible deadlines, restructuring demands, but Emma had walked around her desk, placed a warm hand on her shoulder, and everything seemed to charge with electricity. "You're Victoria Hale. You don't give up. We'll find another way." The gesture had been brief, professional, but Victoria had felt it ignite something she hadn't acknowledged before. Her eyes met Emma's, and there it was, something fierce, protective, and more than just loyalty. "And if there isn't another way," she had whispered, "then we'll make one. Together." And they had. A solution that not only saved the deal but strengthened their position in Southeast Asia. Victoria remembered that moment, the warmth of Emma's hand, the certainty in her eyes. Had Emma felt more than dedication then? Had Victoria been too absorbed in work to see it? The intercom buzzed. "Miss Hale, your 3 p.m. is here." The afternoon passed in a blur, meetings, calls, but her mind kept drifting to memories of Emma. How she had laughed at Victoria's rare jokes. How she anticipated needs before they were even voiced. How she had looked at one Christmas party in red, unforgettable. Victoria had told herself it was just observation, like noticing a painting or sunset, but she knew she'd been lying. By 5 p.m., she finally gave up. Remaining meetings were cancelled. She drove home to her penthouse, hands trembling slightly as she tried to decide what to wear, what to say, how to face what was coming next.